Okay, good morning, everyone. I want to go ahead and begin right at 10:30 and be respectful of everyone's time. A few housekeeping things. If you haven't muted your computer, if you would kindly do that in hopes that we can drown out any additional noise during the presentation. And I know there's been a few of you messaging that there's some echoing, so I'm hoping that that will help once everyone mutes their screen. Please know you can always, in the chat box, submit a question. We've broken down this presentation in different categories, and we'll be allowing questions to be answered after each section. So if a question comes up after each section that Michelle presents on, feel free to message me and I will help relay that question to Michelle for her to answer for everyone in attendance. Questions will also be at the very end should something come to you throughout the presentation that you would like to circle back around on. And I just wanted to let you know as well, at the very end of the presentation, there is a survey. It's a 5-question survey. And if you would kindly take a few seconds before logging off to complete that, that will help us understand your interest in moving forward with this type of presentation, or if you would prefer an in-person training like we've done in the past. So that would provide us with great guidance in the future, and I would be so appreciative of that. So I know many of you recognize Michelle. We utilize her expertise quite often and are excited to have her this morning speaking on this topic. But Michelle McCarter is with Blakeman & Associates, and she has over 25 years of experience, with the last 10 years specializing in compliance. And I know many of you utilize her on a weekly basis, some on a monthly basis, a yearly basis, but I really encourage you, this is an offering that we provide our clients complimentary, and if you currently are not set up with an account with Blakeman & Associates, I highly recommend that you either reach out to myself or Tamara Cannon, and we will put you in contact with Blakeman & Associates and get the proper paperwork in place so you can move forward with that should a need arise. So with that being said, if you've muted your screens and computers, I will hand this over to Michelle for her to begin the presentation. So like I mentioned, we have this broken down in different sections, and our first section is going to be on interviewing. The second section is going to be on hiring, with communication following that. So Michelle, I'm going to turn it over to you to begin introducing all there is to know in regards to the interviewing aspect.
Okay, there's a lot to know. We will cover what we can today. All right, so everybody should have the seminar notes where they can take messages from. Is that too much of an echo or just for me? All right. So the first thing we're going to discuss is being prepared for your interview. So a lot of times we get applicants in and we don't really prepare ahead of time. Being prepared is critical step one to clarify what you're looking for so that you can choose the right applicant. When you get okay, still an echo. Is it an echo for everybody else?
I'm getting a few people saying there is an echo. Do you want to try to take your headset off?
Yeah. Okay, so how about now? Is that better? Is that better?
Better. I'm not hearing anything from anyone yet.
Okay, so should I disconnect or just stay on this for a while? Okay.
I'm hearing it still an echo. Some are saying it's better. Some are saying they don't hear an echo. No echo. I think you're good.
I think it's better. All right.
Maybe for those participants that are maybe having an echo, you might try calling in via your phone. That might help.
Okay.
Thank y'all.
Let's get back on track. Sorry about all the technical difficulties. This is a new, interesting time for all of us. So we really need to do a little bit of pre-work to prepare ourselves to get the most out of our interview. And by that, I mean you need to clarify exactly what you're looking for in the position. You need, or you should, we recommend you have a pay range for each position and a job description so that you can clarify just exactly what you're looking for. So by doing that, what you're trying to do is weed through a group of applicants to choose the best applicant for the position that you have. So I don't know how many of you have a pay range for each job, but that is recommended. And then based on where somebody fits with their skill set, years of experience, they would fall either on the high end or low end of that range. And it's a really good way to be able to defend why you paid somebody more than somebody else. There are a lot of laws out there, including equal pay, and it is a big issue these days. A lot of you might remember the EEOC was looking for pay data on positions. That was known as the Component 2 data, which they postponed, but that is something that you should be aware of, should be on your radar. Another way to prepare for your interview and make sure that your interview process is consistent and fair for all applicants is to have a set of questions that you ask every applicant. And then before the interview, decide who's involved. You know, do you want to have one-on-one or two people from the company involved? Do you want to have a panel interview? Do you want to have a series of interviews where somebody does the initial interview and then you're passed on to the next group to have a second interview? And it could depend on jobs too. I mean, for an entry-level position, you may just have one interview, where for a higher level position or department manager, you have more interviews or a panel interview. And then deciding based on the job, how you're going to evaluate all the candidates. So you can't know how you're going to evaluate them until you know what you're looking for and what criteria you want everybody to have. So one of the things you're doing is, for example, if you're looking for a forklift operator, one of the criteria would be that they've been a forklift operator for a number of years, or that they know how to operate a specific type of forklift that you use. That way you evaluate all candidates against the same set of criteria. It's also important to take notes while you interview because you want to be able to remember the different interviews. Even having interview notes, especially if you have different departments interview. So if HR interviews, they might make notes, you know, consistent growth and long-term employment experience in the field, things like that. And then you could even have a selection spreadsheet. This is a real good way to defend against discrimination in the hiring process or, you know, application process. Because if you have select criteria on a spreadsheet, like the forklift operator was talking about with the experience and the type of forklifts that they operate, you can see just at a glance, applicant 1 had all of these things checked and applicant 2 did not. Therefore, any third party looking at that documentation would be able to say, yes, you did hire applicant 1 and there was no bias in your interview process. So screening your applicants, what you're trying to do is, you know, you might have an influx of applicants for any given job, so you're trying to narrow it down. You're trying to look at things on the resume or the application that we would call red flags. So one of the things you would try to hone in on is the different jobs they've had. Are they somebody that moves on to a different job every year, or do they show some job stability? What we're trying to look for is those red flags. So if somebody was at one job for a year and the next job they were there longer, that's not necessarily a trend. But a job hopper is somebody that maybe changes jobs every year or so. So that's an example of something that I would dig further into in my interview. So at a glance, you're looking for that. Now, it's true that there might have been a layoff. It might have been not the applicant's fault, but it could mean that there's somebody that is not going to be truly happy anywhere. One mature applicant might say, well, there's an issue in every job and I just need to find the right fit for me. Somebody else, as soon as they find an issue in a job, they're ready to move on. Or as soon as they don't grow as quickly as they think they should, they move on. So these are things to look for. Also, if there's been a lot of job stability, you want to look for career growth. Even in between different jobs, you want to see, did they start out in one position and steadily grow? Or did they end up starting over in their career a few years down the road? These are things that you want to hone in on so that you can clarify in your interview. So this is still the screening process of the interview, but I didn't feel it would be complete if all we did was talk about just the interview itself. So we're looking for gaps in employment. Sometimes people leave a job off of their background because they don't want you to contact that person, or they wish they forget they worked there. Could mean that they were out of work for an extended period of time, or they did something else. Some people don't put unrelated jobs on their application, but as an employer trying to find the best applicant and the right fit for the job and the company, we want to know full information. So I would ask them about that gap in employment. Sometimes your answers will surprise you. Sometimes it'll be, we moved here, we moved there, or, I had difficulty finding a job, I was a stay-at-home parent, or I just didn't put that job because it was retail and this is a construction job. So those sorts of things all help us. We also want to dig a little bit into the education if it pertains to the job that we need filled. And again, looking at the application or the resume in terms of what is needed for that particular job, whether it's skill set or education or years of experience. We also want to determine if there is a financial fit for the job's pay range that I mentioned earlier. So some applications gather what somebody was making in a previous job. Some don't. Some people put their salary requirements on the resume. Those sorts of things are important for us to know, because if we're trying to screen out applicants and we know somebody wants 10 times what the job is going to pay, maybe we don't move them to the next step of the interview process, because if we know we're not going to be able to pay that, they're just filling time until they find something that will pay them that. Or we know that going into it, they're not really going to be happy in that role. So we do need to evaluate whether or not it's going to be a fit for what the job can pay. I do want to make sure that even though on the previous slide we talked about the importance of documentation and evaluating your applicants and taking notes so that you remember who said what and somebody's skill, we also want to be sure that we don't write on an application and that we choose our words carefully. Documentation is huge in the HR field, but bad documentation can really be terrible for you as an employer. You might have a completely innocent reason for writing something on an application, just trying to remember who was who, and so I've heard horror stories of people writing, large female or, race and gender or something like that on the application, or, can't work weekends, takes care of kids. If you think of what your risk is when you're if you don't hire somebody, people can pursue discrimination or even in some cases retaliation claims, lawsuits, or through the EEOC. And what they'll want to do is they'll ask you for your documentation. So turning in that application that has little comments that may mean something completely different to you, and you had, like that, I said, that innocent reason for writing it, a third party is going to look in that and say, oh, okay, maybe there is something here. Maybe they really did discriminate, or maybe they were looking for that. I had to train one manager one time that wrote Catholic and married on the application. And that's huge no-no, you know, but she had been doing it that way for years. She'd been in her job for over 30 years and had always done it that way. And it wasn't until we had to help them fight an EEOC claim that it really, the light went on and they really understand why you don't do those things. So after we screen our applicants and we've, you know, we know what we're looking for, now it's time for the interview. Now the interview is where you get to ask questions, and it should be consistent for the job. So if you're going to interview 5 HR people, you should ask about the same set of questions of all those 5 people. Now that doesn't mean that you can't dig deeper into the gaps or the shorter length of service, or, you know, why did you change from this field to that field? It doesn't mean you can't dig deeper. We want you to do that because this is where you're really trying to find out as much information that you need to know to figure out what's the best hire for my company, for the organization. So we will dig deeper on those questions, but starting out with a set list of questions. Think about, you know, requirements for the job. Are you certified HR professional, whether it's through SHRM or HRCI? How many years of experience? Have you been a generalist, or have you specialized? In what fields do you specialize? These are the specific details that we should be consistent. Then we get into the questions. We never want to ask illegal questions, and that's, think of it in terms of any time that you're looking at something specific to the person, like what is their age? Are they married? What's their religion? Do they have a disability? Do you plan to start a family? How are you going to handle childcare? All those things should be off limits and nowhere in your interview process. Now, sometimes it comes up in the conversation, like if you dig into a gap in employment and they say, I stayed home to raise my family. A lot of people mistakenly believe that's an in, and it's okay because they brought it up first. So now I can dig into that. Oh, how many kids do you have? Who's going to watch your kids while you work? Are weekends and evenings going to be okay? I mean, what sports do they do? I mean, we do want to know about the people that we work for, and we do want to develop relationships with our team. But this stage in the hiring process is not the place to do that. So just because they brought it up, don't write it down. Don't dig further into those illegal questions. Now, legal questions really can be a wide range, but what you're going to do is you're going to focus on what skills, education, and things like that are needed for the job. So when you look at those sorts of details, just focus on the job. You know, how many different forklifts can you operate? How many different machines? If you worked in a fab shop, how many, you know, different machines have you worked? Focus on maybe the environment that they've worked in. You know, do you work outside in the elements? Have you done that before? Well, our warehouse is not air conditioned. You know, you're going to go over these sorts of things. But you're also going to look at, you want to know, are they a problem solver? Do they take initiative? Are they going to be reliable? So we can talk about, we need to think of another way to ask those questions, because there's a lot of interview prep out there on the internet and different places that tell people, you know, the right questions to ask. So a common one is, you know, give me some of your strengths and weaknesses, or tell me what those are. And the guidance is you just word a strength in excess to be your weakness. That's what some of the guidance is. So asking that question, you're not likely to really get a real thoughtful answer. You're likely to get, you know, one that they've prepped for. So I like to ask questions where they have to think about a time that they solved a problem. Can you tell me about that? Can you think about a time that you had a conflict in the job? You know, give me Share that story with me. What was the conflict and how did you resolve it? Here you're trying to find out, how they work with others. And if they have a conflict, are they going, straight to HR, or are they trying to handle it first at the lowest level? Are they a creative problem solver? Tell me about a time you introduced a new process or found a better way to do something. Can you give me an idea of what your previous employer or supervisor would tell me if I called them for a reference? Things like that tend to, you can see the wheels turning and you realize maybe it's a more honest, heartfelt answer. And you're just trying to find out as much information as you can before you hire. So I know this is very brief. Everything is going to be fairly brief on the topic, but just wanted to give you a high-level overview and some things that are key. Are there any questions on what we've talked about so far? Because we don't have the kind of time for a real in-depth seminar on each topic, but I'd be happy to answer any questions anybody has right now on the interviewing and screening process.
So Michelle, I did have a participant message in the chat box, and they are finding that it's really difficult to keep employees, that employees do move from job to job, and they're always looking to advance by moving to a different job. And so do you have any guidance or helpful input to share regarding employees constantly leaving a job to try and further their titles?
Yes, I do. Now, there's, I think, a couple different, there's two levels the way I look at it in HR. One is that tactical level, that fundamental level where we're looking at, the compliance requirements and we're just trying to hire. The next level is more of the strategic level where you're going to try and enhance and improve performance and longevity and things like that. That would be an example of something where I would look at a broad approach. One, total compensation. Are you explaining what the total compensation is and how you might be different than the next person that's given them 25 cents or 50 cents more an hour or a different opportunity? So you want to focus on that, the true compensation that they're getting in their job, more than just what they're getting per hour. What do you contribute for the health insurance? What do you contribute for the 401k? Do they get a car or a cell phone? Things like that need to be part of the conversation. It also needs to be part of the conversation on the front end with the screening and the interview process. What are you looking for? What plans do you have for the future? What are you looking for in your employer? One of the questions that we ask a lot is, what did you like or dislike in your previous job? And you hear some of those things, and then you have to really think about, are they going to run into those same problems here? How am I going to keep that person happy and growing? And if that person's always moving to grow up their ladder, what can I offer as an employer as far as a growth plan? So after you've addressed total compensation, I would look at what is the career ladder and what does growth look like at your job. If you start as a forklift operator one, and that's where the job description and the pay ranges really come in handy, because those are tools that you can use to say, the job that I'm hiring you for has this criteria. We believe in promoting from within, and this is something you need to tell people if that's the case. So before we advertise on the outside, we post internally. We also look at, discuss what it takes to get to the next level. When we do annual employee evaluations, we look at what your next steps with us can be. We communicate with you what we'd like to see so you can move to this next position. So if they feel that there's growth potential and the communication is transparent on that, it's not a secret what it takes to move up in the company, they feel more like they have an opportunity. And if you have the specifics like the pay ranges and the job descriptions, it helps you say, the pay range for this job is this, and we want people to grow from within, and we want somebody that's experienced and cross-trained in many different departments. To get to this next level, you need to now test or be proficient in this or operate this piece of equipment. So these are the steps that it takes for you to get to the next position. And having, having a compensation plan that, you have a pay range for the job, you know that it's higher. What do? Do you evaluate performance at 90 days, 6 months, a year? Does the company need to be successful, and then individual performance and department performance? So think about those things. Your company should have a plan for what you look at to do that. Is a reasonable raise? What is a reasonable raise here? What type of performance gets you that raise? And it's fine. It's helpful for you to have those conversations in the orientation process, which we're going to talk a little bit more here, and the onboarding. We want constant communication to be able to have those long-term employees. And that is one way that you can really excel as an employer and up your performance game, is by having some of that stability and getting to that next level instead of constantly turning people over. So when we get somebody, we should say, for you to grow with us, we need to see initiative. We need to see reliability. We will train you and cross-train you in different positions, but we need to see some initiative on your part. We value teamwork here. We value attention to detail, and tell people what it is, so it's not a mystery, that when they see that there is growth potential, maybe they'll talk before leaving. And also just keeping the lines of communication open between the supervisor and the employees and HR, and that comes with communicating your expectations with them. So hopefully
Thanks, Michelle. So yeah, that's so great. Thank you so much. We're getting lots of great questions coming in via the chat box and question and answer box. I have another question. Are you allowed to take a picture of the applicant in order to try to remember each applicant?
I would not recommend it. It's not specifically illegal to take a picture, but think about worst case scenario. Think about, a discrimination claim that you didn't hire somebody. Now, part of the process, let's say they go to the EEOC and you have to answer a claim, and the applicant says, well, they took my picture and I happen to be, an Asian female, and I wasn't hired. So in their mind, they may feel it's for that reason. Now, there are some ways that you can try to defend that, but it looks on its surface like it might be done for not a very good reason. Now, if you communicate to the applicant the reasons why you're doing it, and you communicate why somebody didn't get offered the job, like if you follow up, maybe you have less risk. Those are things that would mitigate your risk some, but I wouldn't recommend it. I would recommend taking notes, but taking notes that are job related, so that you can tell the difference, and it doesn't appear that you might be choosing somebody based on what they look like, which, could be communicating to you and those in decision making, what their race is, what their gender is, what their age is. All of those things are protected things that you should not be basing a decision on. So it would just be harder to defend that you took the picture to remember the difference between the applicants. So I would recommend interviewing notes instead that are detailed, and maybe a little bit of time between interviews, so that you can really either as a team discuss what you liked or didn't like about that applicant, and take some good notes so that you can remember.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. What about, can you make a copy of their driver's license when they first apply?
No, I would not recommend you do that. Again, the driver's license is going to tell you date of birth and have their age on it. Those are protected questions that's protected information in the interview process. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, I need it for a driver job. There's really 3 distinct phases to the hiring process. There's the interview, conditional offer, and then the hiring. So right now, what we just discussed was really your screening and your interview process. So you're looking for skills that match the job and experience and all of that. So let's say your process quickly goes to the conditional offer because you need people quickly and you need to fill that slot and you need a driver. And so you do need to know that they have a valid driver's license, and you do need to run their MVR. So you can make each section distinct by again, being transparent and communicating. So, we've narrowed down our scope. We'd like to offer you the job, but in order for you to work here or in this position, we need to run your MVR. We need to confirm that you have a valid license. So we need a copy of your driver's license for that purpose. So the difference is you're making a conditional offer, and the offer is contingent upon them continuing to meet your hiring criteria, whether it's, they have an acceptable MVR or what have you. But just getting a copy of the driver's license or something like that in the interview stage is not recommended, because again, just like the picture, how are you going to defend that you didn't not hire them because of, they didn't have a license? Well, was that a requirement for the job? Or, you saw their date of birth. Try defending you didn't hire them because of their age, especially if you hired somebody younger than them. So when you have to answer an EEOC claim, you have to present data and facts to them. And sometimes they can expand the scope. I've helped a client answer one where they wanted 2 years worth of people that they hired. They wanted age and race and sex for everybody that you hired in a 2-year period. So that's a lot of time and effort when you can avoid something like that just by fine-tuning your process a little bit. Also, some people have asked for things in the hiring process because they know they're going to need it later for the I-9. The I-9 is very specifically in that hiring stage. And there have been claims of discrimination based on natural origin because you asked for it early on, or like Social Security card or something like that.
Michelle, if an applicant discloses criminal history on their application, how do you suggest approaching that subject and proper?
Can you say that again?
Yes. If an applicant discloses criminal history on the application, how do you suggest approaching that subject with correct verbiage?
Okay, so that's a good question. Ban the box laws have grown a lot. In Texas, if you're not in Austin and Dallas, you don't really have the same ban the box requirements. But what they mean by ban the box is that box on the front of the application that says, have you ever been convicted of a felony, and explain the circumstances, and it may not necessarily bar you from employment. But we all know that it causes us to think certain things. So what we would recommend is, well, there's a few things that touch on the compliance, but what we would recommend is an individualized assessment. So if you are not in a ban the box state or city, then you can still have that on your application, but you should make what we call an individualized assessment. That is the charge compared to the job. So you're going to look at the charge, how long ago it was. If somebody is 20 and they were just arrested at 20 for theft and they want to work in your, accounting department where you have access to petty cash, then that is job related and recent, and that would be a legitimate reason to not hire that person or move forward with that person. If it's something like you have a contract with school and the person had a sexual misconduct, indecency with a minor, something like that. There are certain things that are bars to employment in certain industries and with certain contracts that you have with clients. So those are things that you look at, but you want to look at the recency. If it was when they were 18 and they're now 50 and they've had a clean record, what are the chances that there's going to be an issue in your workplace? So how you address that on the application, maybe you get some basic information, maybe you see it on the application, but let's say that, some people also lie on the application and don't put anything. So one of the things you do in your conditional offer phase is run a background check. So how you run your background check is going to dictate some requirements you have if you decide to take adverse action, meaning you don't move forward with that applicant. So if you run the background through a consumer reporting agency, so if you send it off to Background Checks or Us and they run it and you get results, then you're bound to what's called the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And you have to do a pre-adverse action letter, give them a copy of the report, tell them who pulled the report, and then give them time to clear up misinformation on their record. This is not an employment law, just like the new hire reporting requirement is not an employment law. This is so that people can clear up misinformation that keeps them from getting jobs or homes or loans, things like that, that come back on their background check report. But it still is a requirement that you have to follow. So my communication, let's say I see something on the application, you can address it if you feel like it is a job-related thing, or you can move on to screening them for the skills and everything else and treat them like every other applicant. And then just based on their skill set and experience alone, if they make it to the conditional offer phase, then you run the background check and you find out more and you really dig into those details. That would be my preference or my recommendation, because it shows that you're treating everybody the same. You're holding everybody to that same criteria that you're going to hire. And we know that there can be adverse impact or disparate impact on people that have criminal records, which is something that is protected in the workplace as well.
So we're getting so many great questions. Thanks, Michelle, for that. If the position requires another language, is it appropriate to ask a question in the preferred second language to see the proficiency of the applicant?
Absolutely.
Ability?
Absolutely. And I love the way that question was worded, because they said if it's required in the job. So yes, absolutely. You can do employment tests during the application phase. You know, if it requires somebody to read and speak Spanish and communicate in Spanish, you can do a little mini Spanish test. If a job requires QuickBooks proficiency, you can give them a little QuickBooks test, but just be sure you give it to every applicant that you've narrowed your scope to, instead of just giving it to the person that you think may not speak Spanish. You know what I'm saying? Just having that consistency.
And then if a applicant shows up for a professional position in a t-shirt and flip-flops and shorts, are you able to note that in your notes?
Yes. What I would do is be careful, but yes, I would put showed up in, you know, professional position, showed up in unprofessional attire, wore, you know, shorts, flip-flops, cut off t-shirt, whatever. Now, where I wouldn't go into detail about something is, you know, a lot of visible tattoos or piercings or things like that, even though that might be a criteria that's prevalent nowadays. So maybe part of the discussion in your interview process would be our dress code requires that you cover up visible tattoos when you go into a client's home. You know, let's say the job is HVAC or something. So would you have a problem with that would be a question that you could ask. But yes, what you've, the question you've asked is 100% okay.
And then Michelle, do you have any recommendations on where to find good interview questions?
I could email out some interview questions to you after this, if you want me to. You know, the internet is full of information. Some of it's good and some of it's not. So if you can find anything out there, I'm sure there's a lot of sources, but just read those questions in line with what we've discussed today. And then I can, you know, I can send some after the webinar.
I'm getting a lot of messages that we have a lot of interest for that. So I'll make a note and do a follow-up on that as well. And I'm going to do one last question for this section, and then we're going to move on. What do you recommend for an employer who wants to begin running background checks that haven't done it before? Do they need to go back and then run background checks on all current employees?
So that's a good question. It is permissible for you to start something new. And if it's going to be a requirement for the job, then I do think it is a good idea for you to go back and run the background checks on those people. But let's say, for example, you have some entry-level positions that it's really not required. A company choice to do that going forward today, then move forward today. But if you're going to say that I'm going to require, which you should, all my HVAC people to get a background check before they go into my clients' homes, then everybody that you've had doing that job now, regardless of how long they've been there, they should be included because it's a requirement of that job.
Okay, and I'm going to try to sneak in one more, and then we're going to move on to the next section. What would you say is an appropriate amount of time to wait for an applicant to show up for an interview, whether it's in person, on Zoom, before you assume it's a no-show?
Okay, well, there's no legal requirement on that, but, that's something I would take notes on. If they showed up 10 minutes late or 15 minutes late, did they call, and was there a good reason? I would say whether it's Zoom or in person, after 15, 20 minutes, I'd be done, and I would note it in the application. Now, if that person followed up with me later and said they were in a car accident or something, I'd be gracious. If they called me before they were late, that would be my preference. That would make a better impression on me. But certainly being late to an interview when they're supposed to be trying their hardest to get their job, that's typically when people put forth the most effort. To me, that would be a very negative indicator of them being a reliable person and being on time at my job. So they'd have a lot to overcome if they got a second chance to me.
I understand. Thank you.
Okay, so you want me to move on to the next section now?
Yes, I think we're going to move on to hiring, onboarding, and orientation.
Yes, so those three things are a little bit different, although they sound the same, and some people use them interchangeably. Hiring is basically the act of hiring somebody. Orientation is an event. It could be long or short. You're orienting them to your new company. And, a lot of people think of it as hiring is doing the paperwork that's required to be hired. And then orientation is explaining some of the basics about the company that you're now working for, things like that. Onboarding is more an ongoing process that has steps. Because if you think about onboarding, it can overlap into training, but, are we setting them up for success? Are we giving them some, the tools that they need, clarifying our expectations, think of things like that. So for the hiring act, I guess you could say it could be a job offer, it could be an offer letter. If you do send an offer letter, be careful in the wording of it, because an offer letter might be seen as a contract or an agreement that you need to follow up with. And here we want to be sure we're maintaining that at-will employment status. So just be a little careful about the job offer letter if you are that formal, but you could make the job offer verbally. Regardless of if you make it verbally or if you do it with a letter, there should be some signed documentation done at your new hire, with your new hire, that says, you're hired for this position at this pay, and you're exempt or you're non-exempt. Now, exempt is you're exempt from overtime. So very few exemptions. You should think of everybody as non-exempt, and then you have to qualify to meet an exemption. But that's something that you need to have on file and should be signed by both parties so that there's no question. If you give somebody an allowance for cell phones, or if you give them, if there's a premium pay for weekends or overnights, these are all things that you could put on that initial new hire form. And the important thing is just being specific about the pay, whether or not they would be overtime eligible, what the job class is, and any specifics about their pay, and that should be signed by both people. But the hiring time is I think of it as their first day. And typically your HR team is involved because there's a lot that needs to be signed up for. It's not as bad as like buying a house, but there is a lot of paperwork. So that first day is when you should aim to do your I-9. A quick word about the I-9. There is, since we're doing things remotely now with COVID, there is a little bit of an exemption here where you can look at documents and do it remotely, but it is only a temporary thing, and it doesn't alleviate the requirement for you to still see those documents and touch them and feel them and validate that they are accurate and relate to the person when you do your I-9. So if you do an I-9 while everybody's working remotely, then you put it to the side and you still have a duty to do that before you file it away. So on the I-9, be sure that they get to pick the documentation that they choose to give you. If you do not, E-Verify. E-Verify has a few different requirements, but you also want to give them that new complicated W-4 form. That's where you want to go over your policies and your policy manual, things like that. As I mentioned, orientation and onboarding is more than paperwork. Think of it as, this is where I'm going to talk to you about what's required in your job, where I'm going to start you off with the best chance of success, because it costs money, whether directly or in time, to weed through applicants, to interview, to do background checks, to do hire. So we do all that pre-work and all that work, and then we hire them, and sometimes we don't take those extra steps to ensure that it's a good experience on their first day or their first week, or that they have the tools that they need to be able to succeed in their new role. So just go that extra step, prepare for them coming, make them feel welcome. If they're going to have an office job, make sure that they have a computer and their desk is cleared off, and maybe they have, flowers or a little welcome or something where they get to feel that welcoming step, because it's hard to start a new job, and it's, you're maybe nervous that they're going to make it, and they're probably nervous that they've made the right decision. So let's try to prepare for that and make it a good experience. We want to not only give them the tools that they need, but if there's unwritten rules, like where you park or don't park, because people can be picky like that. So let's give them those things too. Let's maybe set them up with a buddy so that they have somebody to go to lunch with on their first day, somebody to tell them, what around here is good to eat, or where can you get to quickly, or it's important not to come back from lunch late, things like that, whatever those unwritten rules are. Having a buddy and just putting a little bit of time and effort and preparation into that first day so that they feel welcome. This is also the time where we want to clarify expectations and lay the foundation of what this company expects. So somebody might have been a very experienced admin person, but your organization is different. Maybe your organization has different company values or culture, might have different policies. Let's take that added step to clarify those things and communicate them, instead of just giving somebody the policy manual, which, could be pretty thick. We want them to sign the back and we put that in the file. But that paper is the paperwork process of hiring. Right now, I'm talking about the part where we communicate, the part where we discuss and try to, continue that chance that they're going to succeed in their job. It's been proven that if we explain the purpose behind somebody's job, explain their role in the bigger picture, people like to work for something greater than themselves. They like to understand their place in the big scheme of things. They like to, most people want to do a good job for you. And so when we take the time to explain that, we're showing them that we value our values and our company, and we value you coming here, and we want you to succeed. So we also want to be transparent and fair and consistent. By transparency, I mean, like an example I gave earlier, where you tell somebody the question about, job hopping, where you tell somebody the benefits of working here. You tell somebody what it takes to get a raise or what it takes to go ahead. That sort of transparency, it builds trust. You want to have some trust in your working relationship, because honestly, if you don't have trust, that you don't know where you stand, you don't perform the same, you don't feel the same about coming to work each day. So you also want to have this process be somewhat consistent and streamlined, to give everybody the same chance to succeed and give everybody the same information. So I recommend having like a checklist where you go over whether it's key policies, or you show them your company values, or you walk them around and you introduce them to key people or to everybody, whether you assign them a buddy. I mean, these are things that you want to be sure that if you do for this admin, you do for the next admin, because doing so would be unfair. You gave this person every chance to succeed in their role, and you didn't do the same with this person. You also want to let them know what's expected in the job. If your company is a stickler about being at work on time, that is something that should be reiterated and not just buried in a policy manual. How we work with other people inside, whether it's interdepartmental or how we treat our customers, is something that you want to clearly communicate as well. And, pay attention to who you have doing the orientation. Are they a good spokesperson for your organization? Are they somebody that is going to be a good representative of what your values actually are, what your brand is, how you feel about the work that you do? So after we do that, then we get into the training phase of the job. So sometimes we only train on, we operate the forklift from here to here, and we're very narrow in our scope. But the stuff I covered on the previous slide is one way that we can train on a broader scope, where we give them more than just what they need in their particular job. We're giving them what they need to be successful at our company, at our organization. So you need to stop and think, who's going to train my new hire? And again, with being prepared for their first day, we want maybe a checklist of what things should they be trained on. So every forklift operator should be trained on, the safety, the backing up, the, securing yourself and different things like that, not wearing earbuds, all of those things we want to be sure we cover. We want to be sure that we train or onboard every forklift operator the same. But we also want to think of things like, who is my best trainer? Sometimes we make the mistake as employers of having the outgoing employee train the new hire. You really need to dissect that decision. Is the person leaving? Are they disgruntled? Did they decide to leave, or did we let them go? Did they do a good job? Were they meeting the requirements of the job? Did they have bad habits that we didn't want them to train a new person on? Something as simple as, the person you choose to train is always on their cell phone. Well, when they're training their new employee, this is their first time seeing what your organization accepts. When they see the person you've assigned as their trainer always on their cell phone, then now they believe, regardless of what your policy manual says, that it's perfectly fine for them to be on their cell phone all day. So just think about those things, put a little thought into it. Do we trust the person that they're going to teach them the right way? If it's a combination, like maybe a sales position where we have them sit with a number of different key personnel, maybe give a checklist that we want each person to go over. If I have them spend time with you, I want you to explain X, Y, Z, because the time that they spend with the same person, a different person, we don't want them going over the same information. So even though everybody's take might be a little different, it's going to be real boring for that new hire if they hear the same spiel from 5 different people. Whereas, think about who you have them talking to and what they excel in, and are they going to be the real motivational person to talk about customer service? Just give them those, that list really to stay organized. And if the training lasts beyond a day, let's communicate to the employee, day 1 is going to be like this. Day 2, you're going to have a little bit of individual work time. You're going to have lunch, and then you're going to do this. Let's give people that comfort and not the guessing game. Let's be transparent about what our plan is. And the more time and energy you put into training, I think it sends a good message to the employee that we care about you being here. We care about you doing a good job. And so we're investing in you by spending this time training with you. And also, let's not forget to ask questions. How did you feel about your training today? Is there something that you would like to revisit? Was your time with so-and-so long enough, or would you like a little more time on this aspect of your training? We need to remember to be patient, because even though somebody is coming in with the experience that they need for the job, everybody does it differently. Everybody learns differently. So different learning styles. Somebody can be visual. Somebody has to be hands-on. Some people need to know the why to understand what to do in their job. If I understand the why, then I can get it and I know how to do it. But you might need to train. You might need to retrain. You might need to say it a few different ways until that light bulb goes off. One trick in training is to have somebody repeat it back to you for clarification. So if I just told you how to do something, do you have any questions? Okay, good. So can you, repeat it back to me and tell me what the first step is when we do this? And then that's how you really know what they retained, because they might hear it, but they may not retain it. But we need to be flexible. And if something is important in your organization, let's not assume everybody knows what that is or has the same common sense. One of my friends has a saying that she says, common sense doesn't grow in everybody's garden. So by assuming somebody automatically knows what professional dress is or the right way to answer the phone, instead of being upset that they did it wrong, or instead of being disappointed that they came in and didn't pick up the little clues that were around, let's stop the guessing game and give them all the information they need to make a good decision, or to move forward in the best way. So that is another brief section. Are there any questions on that part?
So I have received a question, Michelle. At what point do you do a background check and pre-employment drug test, and how does that affect someone's eligibility for hire?
Okay, so you do that in the conditional offer phase. So after they've been hired, you don't do that. So typically you want to do that before your first day. So so let's say you interviewed the applicant, you narrowed it down, you can check the references, you have all your people interview, this is the one you want. So let's say a drug test and a background check and an MVR is required in their job. So then you say, we like you for this position, we want to hire you at this rate of pay, we want you to start on this day, but to continue to meet our hiring criteria, we need to do a background check, an MVR, and you need to take a drug test. So these are the steps that we need you to follow to be able to do that, and we expect your start date to be Monday. And then you give them what they need, you get the results. Sometimes the results take a while, especially if there's a dilute or maybe a positive. If the drug test is taking a while to get the results, I would say do not start them, because it's much easier not to start them than do all this paperwork and start them and have to let them go because the drug test came back positive. So for those of you that aren't aware of the process, a drug test goes in, and if there's something suspicious about it, it goes to the MRO, which is the medical review officer. And before they give you the answer, it's already been confirmed by the MRO, that's their specialist. But the MRO needs to call the employee. So sometimes the employee, if they're concerned they might pop positive, they're gonna avoid that call. So after so many attempts, so many days, then you get the result. Also, there's people that are on prescriptions. So if they're on prescription medication, but let's say it's coming out on their drug test, they might need to show their prescription to the MRO. They could be taking somebody else's prescription. They could be taking it in excess of the prescribed limits and doses. So those are all things that go into that answer. So there can be a delay. So I say that step is best done in the conditional offer phase before they start work, before you start their paperwork. Also the same as a background check. As we talked about earlier, if the background check comes back with something negative, we want a little time to make that individualized assessment. Do I still want to hire them for this? How long ago was it? you know, are we sure it pertains to this person? That's where you go into the Fair Credit Reporting Act compliance steps. Also, what was I going to say? Also, we look at, is it a requirement in the job, you know, or is it something that makes me uncomfortable? Because let's say that you started them before you had the results. Now you have to have the conversation where you let them go, but you also open yourselves up for negligent hiring claim. If you think about that HVAC person, employee that you let go into a customer's home that, you know, had something, you know, horrendous on there and something bad happened, that's worst case scenario. But starting somebody before you have those results, if you require it, only makes sense. And then once you get the results back, then day one is the new hire paperwork and the onboarding process. Also, I want to say one more thing about training. When you're training somebody new, just like when you're trying to hire the right person that has the experience, looking at that job description and having that be part of your training, that could be your little checklist, you know, like what is required in the job? Did you cover each one of these things with that person?
Perfect. So I'm going to do one more question for this section, and then we'll move on to communication. I want to make sure we have enough time for that and follow-up questions regarding all the sections. But the last question for this portion, I know many people wear multiple hats in an organization. What processes do you recommend for someone that's in charge of HR, hiring, the orientation, the onboarding, as well as non-related duties? What do you suggest for that participant who wears that many hats? They're trying to just ensure all proper steps are taken and completed in order for things to be successful.
So first of all, I would say that that's a tough job. What I would recommend is just trying to structure as many processes as possible. So, you know, HR, you're talking to people that love documentation, right? But if you had a procedure for the steps you need, if you could have help or it becomes routine or something like that, that's one way to make sure you don't miss anything. Also, trying to separate your day or look at the processes. Do you touch one aspect more than something else? You know, if so, how can I streamline this process so it's a quicker on my part to do X, Y, Z? So maybe it's pre-filling forms, maybe it's, you know, I don't know, just having a checklist where you go through, maybe deciding to say, well, I need you to take messages for the next hour so I can organize my thoughts or think about things. That's a tough question and a tough challenge, but I think it starts with having consistent procedures, because eventually you will get to the point where things are running smoothly and automatically. And especially when you wear so many hats, when you have a lot of turnover, it feels like a never-ending cycle. I've been in that position before, and you almost feel like you can never really get ahead. So trying to just stop, maybe evaluate your turnover, why are we having it, and put some little measures in place to see if we can slow down that turnover and, you know, increase our processes that ensure success.
Okay, thanks so much, Michelle. So let's go ahead and move on to our last section, communication matters. I know communication is extremely important, and we'll have you wrap this up, and then we'll have follow-up questions regarding this section and any other questions that anyone has thought of throughout.
Okay, so what we've been talking about already is the interview process, the hiring process, and now you have people on board with you. So I'd consider all of those the employee life cycle. So it starts with them applying, moves on to hiring, then they're here. Then there's different things that happen during that employment life cycle, whether it's, you know, they perform well, or they break a rule, or they have leave, all of those things, when they have a work-related injury. all the way through separation. That's considered the employment life cycle. Effective communication is necessary to increase your performance and to reduce your employer risk. And that is at every stage. So the things we've been talking about so far with the way that we interview and we onboard and we train all go into this, right? The way that we talked about reducing the risk, the way that we talked about transparent, open communication. Communication plays a key role in creating the workplace that people want to be in and they want to do their best in. So it's been proven that open communication, consistent, respectful, all of those things are necessary to making this happen. But we're going to focus in on performance management right now. So you may have heard this term. Essentially, you're just managing the staff in order to get quality results. So when we fail to have trained supervisors that know how to manage their staff and know what it takes to do the job and how to do it and how to communicate, we can inadvertently create a ripple effect of accepting poor performance or unsafe behavior or policy violations. Using the example from earlier, let's say that one of your important policies is to not have distractions in the workplace from cell phones. Well, everybody's got a cell phone. Hardly anybody has home phone anymore. So if they're on it, whether it's social media or texting or whatever, and that's a distraction and that's a policy of yours, you know, with that new hire being trained by somebody that's already on their cell phone, you've created a ripple effect, right? If that's important to you and you're accepting that, then you're also training that new person to do the same. You've created that ripple effect. So more people are on their cell phones because they see you're not addressing it with the other person. So eventually you get poor morale, you get resentment. This could be, you know, violating a policy. It could be whether it's dress code or, you know, they didn't call in and they were absent, but we let it slide. So then other people start to, you know, bear the burden of that person not being reliable, and maybe resentment develops because now they're covering somebody else's job, or maybe they're having to work extra, or they don't feel somebody's pulling their weight. When you have somebody that is not performing well, their coworkers see it. And then when supervisors fail to address it, maybe they're not present, maybe they're not aware of what it takes to do the job and they're not addressing it, you have more people that end up either giving less, or we have conflict in the workplace. People don't work as a team as well. You might even lose good employees because they feel that they're not happy here because it's not fair. We all have that perception of fairness built in. And when we feel something's not fair or not being addressed, you know, it affects us. Sometimes even consistently solid performers do less because they feel like it doesn't matter when they do more. And so why am I sitting over here working so hard and staying late and making sure everything is done when everybody else on my team doesn't even care to get the details right? So those sort of things are critical, and it's a very important step to be able to get the best from your team. So supervisors have a very big role. When we try to manage performance, because doing so has proven to reduce the cost, whether it's the cost of constantly turning people over, whether it's the cost of a bad hire that caused a lot of damage or caused you to lose an important customer, or just doesn't have that customer service requirement or concern in their job the way you need them to. All of those things are costly, whether it's in actual dollars or whether it's opportunity cost of you don't get that referral or you don't have that relationship that you used to have with that customer. All of those things are important. And if all we do is the basics every time, if all we do is tell somebody how to back up in a forklift and then they do it wrong, and you know, we tell them verbally, you know, you need to do better next time, but everybody else is seeing that we're never really making a change, then before you know it, the supervisor has a huge task in front of them to be able to improve the performance in an entire group. And we're still doing the basics because people are leaving or because we're not trying to get to that next level of performance. So the supervisor needs to be aware of what's going on and stabilize their staff so that we can have that length of service and that knowledge of what it takes to operate successfully in your environment. We also want to maintain fairness, because if I know I got in trouble for doing something and I see Bob not get in trouble for doing something, then that's not fair. I feel like I haven't been treated properly, or worse, discriminated against, because Bob is a different race or a different age or gender than I am. So maybe I think the reason you treated me this way or did this with me is because I'm, fill in the blank, I'm disabled, or I'm this race or that religion or whatever. So it's better to just be specific and hold people accountable consistently. So if somebody is not performing, if somebody is your slowest machine operator, then let's go to them and ask them, how are you doing in the job? Do you understand? Do we need to retrain? Can you tell me what is slowing us down, or things like that? When the other coworkers see that you're addressing that, the performance everywhere in that department is going to stay at a higher level. Also, it's going to be safer, because you're digging into what happened and you're addressing it in that moment. So we want to have smooth, efficient operations in the workplace. We don't want things to take 10 times longer than they need to, because time is money. We need to operate on a good level. If we want an engaged workforce, we want to have a bottom line impact. Your supervisors need to do more than just make sure the trucks get out or make sure the widgets get made. They need to make sure that people are held accountable to what those requirements are. If we do those things, performance gets better. I've got a ton of examples of this one particular company where, somebody was no show, no call the other day, and one of the managers, a high up manager, gave them a verbal. But a no show, no call, typically in their environment, goes straight to a final warning. So now they're having problems with people calling in when they can't be in. They're having problems with people showing up to work on time. At that point, you've got maybe unauthorized overtime because you've got to fill the gap that somebody left because they weren't reliable. You've got maybe additional problems or additional people that are doing the same thing. You've got also risk because you treated two employees differently. When we do that, we create just people are rushing to get their job done, and the performance lacks in their position. And we really want to be able to tune in to those things and address it at that moment. Addressing something a month later when you've had enough has let that poor behavior or poor productivity or mistakes continue to happen. And it's much harder to fix something when we're way down the line than it is when we could have nipped it in the bud originally. So that's focusing on your employees and managing them is what we're talking about here. So how do we get there? As I said, supervisors, they have a big job and they need to be present, but it starts out with setting clear expectations at the beginning, which is why we spent some time on onboarding and orientation. We get there by telling people what we expect and providing them the tools that they need to do the job. We train them. We talk about how we want the job done and why. We give them a sense of a greater purpose of why they're here. But we want to maintain open lines of communication so that if they have an issue that they're dealing with, or maybe they aren't sure what they were supposed to do with this certain widget, the communication is open and they've already had a buddy, or they feel like questions are okay to ask and they don't feel like it makes them look bad, then they're going to ask instead of maybe possibly making that mistake. Now, we all know that we should be respectful and professional and not rude and aggressive in our communications, but studies have shown that that's not enough. You know, we have expectations at people, as people, that we should not be yelled at. So if you don't yell at us, that's great, but that's what I expect. So that's considered like neutral treatment. So not being ugly to somebody, not cursing them out, that's expected. So just because you do that, you don't get a cookie, because that's neutral treatment. It's almost as bad as negative, because we're not making that impact on the employees. It doesn't produce the desired results. So instead, what we want to focus on is actually building relationships, showing a general interest, a genuine interest in each other, because we're at work. Sometimes, you know, more than we're at home. Your work family is important to your success and the company. So we want to invest the time. We want to build those relationships, but we want to consider the words that we use, the tone of voice that we use. We don't want to be demeaning or aggressive. We also don't want to be sitting at our desk looking down and talking to somebody, because that shows them what they have to say is not important to me. If my body language is all over the place and I don't have eye contact, I am telling you non-verbally that you're really not that important to me. I love this quote by Maya Angelou. People will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. We all have a human need to feel valued, right? And when we feel valued, we tend to do more. So, you know, if I feel appreciated, I'm typically going to bend over backwards to help you. If I feel mistreated or like I don't matter to you, I'm probably going to give a little less. And that's just human nature, you know. I looked at a few studies for this, and people that feel valued and included show greater focus at work, better prioritization, and they're more engaged in what they're doing. When somebody is more engaged and they're having greater focus, that means less mistakes. It means better safety. It typically means better productivity. So right here, this is telling you that when you go that extra step, instead of just telling somebody what they need to do, but being a little more involved, a little more human, a little more in tune, we see results. So this is one important way that we're going to get to that next level of performance. We're going to get better productivity. People are going to be working as a team. They like to work here. They want to stay. And we're seeing that ripple effect, or that vicious cycle on the turnover ending, because we're starting to get to that next level. Compliments are important to make people feel valued. They do show appreciation, but they need to be done properly. Because if a supervisor just walks by and says, "You're doing a great job," but I know that they have no idea that they know what it takes to do my job, or that they know what I'm doing, or it comes across as not being sincere, you feel it, right? You can feel it. You can tell when somebody's being insincere. So instead of being vague, or instead of, let's be specific, let's point out specifics. And let's not only celebrate the end result, but the different steps that it took to get there. Now, again, you know, foundation and expectations and consistency, that has been a theme that you've seen throughout this training. But we want to be supportive. We want to be present, but we also need to trust the people that we hire. If we hire them, we're saying just by hiring them that we believe you can do this job. We've done background checks. We've looked at your experience. We've tested you on your forklift skills. We know you can do the job. So let's trust them to do the job. Supervisors get overwhelmed because so many times they are sitting there doing the job that their employees should be doing, because they don't know how to hold them accountable and get the productivity that they need out of those employees. So instead, we're running around with, 10 million hats that we're wearing, because we have to get the widgets out. We have to get those trucks out. We have to do this safely. But because I don't trust you, or because you're not a good performer, I'm going to do your job for you. Well, we're paying that person to do that job, and they're an important cog in the wheel. They're an important part in the big picture, and we need them to do their job. And we need the supervisor to supervise, because that person's probably never even been told that their performance is not up to par. That person may have never been told that you had to go back and fix their report before it could be sent out. We are doing nobody any good if we do not give them that feedback. That's important. Trusting people to do their job builds their confidence and their self-esteem. You want to see somebody's initiative and creative problem solving grow, give them an assignment, trust them to do it, and see what they can do. Be present, be there, be supportive if they need some resources or they need somebody to check in with or be somebody to bounce an idea off of, but help them do it, right? And if they violate something, if they do it wrong, check in at different times during the process so that you can fix something if it's going to go wrong. But, repeat the rules, go over the consequences, make sure that they understand what's going on. But supervision is important. You need to look for those teachable moments. You need to model the right way to do things. If you're going to give feedback, it's not just negative feedback. Acknowledge and reinforce when somebody's doing something right. A supervisor should be present. So if you're a warehouse supervisor, you should be walking around the warehouse, sorry. So if you're walking around the warehouse and you see somebody lifted something wrong, get in there and help them and show them how to do it right in that moment. That's a teachable moment. That's a learning event. Same way if they're doing it right, give them that feedback. Let them know you see what they're doing. As a supervisor, you are constantly monitoring what's going on. And if you praise in public, people shine. You can see that. But if you have a negative, we need to be sure we do it in private. We need to be sure that we're respectful even when we're upset. When somebody has done something that completely infuriates you, step back, because you can't take what you said back and the damage is done. Step back when you're calmer. Fix the problem at hand, but stand back and say, were they ever even told how to do it right? Have I ever held anybody accountable when they did it wrong? What can I do better? You have very little ability to change other people, but you can change the way that you approach things and get a different outcome. If we focus on blame and shame and we create pain in our employees, we have disengaged an employee and shut them down. They are never going to perform to the level that you need them to or want them to, or they're rarely going to do it if they are sitting here and they're just riding the clock until their day is done. That's when you have turnover. That's when you have people that aren't going to grow with your business. You need to empower your staff. You hired them. Let's empower them to make it to the next level. We want to be sure that we get the facts. Don't operate on something you heard from somebody else. Get the facts before you go in to correct or compliment. If you think about a compliment that you gave to Susie when it was actually Tammy that did the work, do you think your compliment's going to mean anything? Do you think that little engagement is going to make a difference? No, because it's either going to come across as insincere or tell everybody you don't know what's going on, or it's going to create space for there to be an argument, for people to, disagree with each other. We want, as supervisors, to get those facts. It is critical. As I said earlier, celebrating the small victories. If you have a big project and somebody met the first deadline, go over and let's celebrate that. Let's talk about how great that is. Let's give that positive feedback. Think of yourself as a coach, you get those, yay, you did it, but you also get that, we need to rebound better. Since basketball's on right now. But anyway, we want to ask those questions. We don't want to jump to conclusions. We don't want to assume that the reason somebody didn't do something is because they didn't care or because they don't know how. We want to ask questions, Can you enlighten me as to why this was chosen in this situation? Or, what can you tell me? I get this a lot, we're unhappy with somebody's performance, but we, out of respect, we don't want to embarrass them or we don't address it. But you're not doing anybody any favors when you don't address it when it's small, because they're going to keep doing whatever it is that you're unhappy with because they've never been told and given the opportunity to improve it. So then what happens is each issue builds. So as a supervisor, you're getting frustrated because, they should know better, they should know better, they should know better. But I fixed it for them and I fixed it for them, but I never had the meeting. I never had that constructive feedback conversation. Then what's happened is you've now, that is the last straw. You are now ready to let them go, and you've never addressed anything, but you're going to terminate them now. So that's unfair. That creates fear amongst your staff because they were never, it feels arbitrary, right? It feels like it's a surprise. We're not doing anybody any favors. If somebody's not doing well in the job, whether it's mental or physical, or you have concerns, we can coach you through how to say it. Some conversations might be delicate, but it starts with having the conversation. Most people want to do the right thing. We create risk as an employer if we let it go when it's all these little steps and then we never warn them, and then all of a sudden we terminate them. So you have risk, whether it's paying unemployment or whether it's fighting an EEOC case or a lawsuit. Anybody can file an EEOC case that says they've been discriminated in the workplace, and it is the employer's responsibility to answer that. If you lose an EEOC claim, the ex-employee or current employee, which would be way more difficult because now they have protection from retaliation because they complained. So at that point, they get a right to sue letter. And so even if they weren't thinking of suing you, now maybe they are. So doing these things that we've talked about today is huge, and it is a way that you reduce your risk. I mean, if you have a lot of turnover, every turnover has the opportunity to create risk, because all of those people going through all of your processes, you've created more opportunities for, if you've done something wrong, to have some serious liability. So we've talked about the role of a supervisor, but we've got to close that gap and we've got to hold people accountable. It is hard. It's much easier to have those positive meetings than it is to have a negative meeting. But like I said, we're not doing anybody any favors, and we have a responsibility to be equal, because let's say your best employee that's been with you for 25 years makes these mistakes and you don't follow them. But a new employee that happens to be of a different race makes those mistakes and you're holding them accountable. Well, they see that you're not holding the other person accountable. So what does that look like to them? That looks to them like you're being discriminatory in your practices and your processes. So we want to hold everybody equally accountable. We want to point out if there's a policy or a procedure that they've violated. We can do that in a couple of ways. We can have it fit in your environment. You could do a corrective action, discipline discussion where it's very, maybe very formal or very strongly worded. You could be a little more gingerly about it and say an employee job modification discussion. There's pros and cons of the way you approach it. A corrective action or disciplinary process, may send the message that you're just doing what you need to terminate. Whereas a modification discussion or a job performance enhancement discussion or form that it might be documented on sends the message that, we just need to tweak things a bit. Now, but it's typically whatever method you use or approach you use, and it should fit in your environment. Typically, it is going to be progressive in nature. So the first time or two or three, whatever is your consistent approach, that you mention something, then that's fine. But then eventually, if it doesn't get fixed, we need to move on to documentation. We need to move on to stronger steps to hold people accountable. That doesn't mean we can't skip steps if the issue is severe, but each thing should be on its own issue. So if somebody violates your cell phone policy and then violates your safety policy, it's not cell phone safety, attendance termination. It's cell phone. I tell them that's not how we do things. They either fix it or they continue, and then we continue in our process. Or if it's a safety issue, they either fix it or we continue along with our process. We can skip steps depending upon severity, but we want to give them that feedback so that they're, understand what's required. But performance improves as a whole when people are held accountable. And proving that you've done that is another way to decrease your employment risk. So documentation is going to be key. And some people get verbals signed. Well, if you have a verbal and you're getting it signed, that's not a verbal. You might document that you've done a verbal because that's your starting place in your file, but it doesn't need to be signed with the employee. When you do that first written, you want to reference that you've addressed this with them on numerous occasions or a few occasions, and then you want to move on to the next steps. So I believe that is everything. I don't know if we have any questions that we want to go over at this point. I know we had a lot of questions after the first session. I know we're at the end of the webinar, but I can answer any questions if we have them.
Thank you, Michelle, for all your input and expertise on the subject. If you do have a question but need to hop off, I understand we've run out of time. Feel free to message me, whether it's in the question and answer box or the chat box, and I'd be happy to get those questions over to Michelle and send those answers in the follow-up email that we will be sending following this. Just a friendly reminder, there is a 5-question short survey at the end that I would greatly appreciate your feedback on. So if you don't mind, before you log off, if you'll complete those 5 questions, and we appreciate your time and you joining us for our first virtual quarterly seminar, and we look forward to hopefully having others of these in the future. But keep those questions coming. I'll keep the question answer box and chat box up for a little bit longer so I can get those questions over to Michelle today. So have a great afternoon, and thanks again.
Thank you. Do we have any questions coming in?
We do. People are asking for some forms, so I'm going to follow up with you on some forms possibly. And we can do that in our follow-up.
Okay.
Here's a question. How long would you suggest keeping applications on file?
You're required to keep applications on file for 1 year.
And then do you have any suggestions on specific types of wording for termination letters? Is that something that maybe we can send a follow-up email with possibly maybe an example?
Yes, I prefer the less said the better, especially when it's in writing. And a termination letter is not a requirement in the state of Texas, so depending upon the circumstances, it might be something you do, but I would not recommend that just be part of your normal process. A termination form as an internal document should follow a set process where you highlight, it would tell a story, like think of that one page as telling a story. So if somebody has been given several verbals and then a written and they violated your policy, you're going to want to say all that in the termination form, not a letter where you're emailing, where you're sending them a letter or emailing them. It's your internal documentation or corrective discipline form. So it would be, you were given a verbal and a written on these dates for a violation of our cell phone policy. Your continued refusal to follow our cell phone policy has resulted in your immediate termination. Something like that. You're going to keep it very cut and dry because hopefully you've been doing your process all along where you have documented each thing and addressed it as time went. So a termination should not really be a surprise. Typically, no matter how many steps you have, we do recommend a final warning where you tell somebody if this issue, if you continue to violate this policy, or if we can't get you to meet this requirement immediately and consistently, your job is in jeopardy. You know, this will result in termination. That language is typically on a final warning form. And at that point, they should expect to be terminated if they do it again. So it makes that termination discussion much quicker. So the reason for the termination is really a brief 1 to 2 minute conversation, and then you move on to the business side of the termination, such as, you know, you'll get COBRA information in the mail, your final paycheck, blah, blah, blah. So if you're doing all of the steps, it makes that last final step a lot smoother.
Perfect. So that's all the questions that have come through. I'll get with Michelle on a few of these. Oh, looks like we have maybe one more. When are we supposed to give them their final paycheck?
Final paycheck in Texas, each state's different, depends on the type of separation. So if it's a resignation, you don't have to process a quicker payroll. It can be their normal pay cycle. If it is a termination, you've severed that arrangement. You've separated the work arrangement. You have 6 calendar days to get them their final paycheck. And some companies might want to hold on to that final check until they get company property, but that would violate Texas payday law. So that's not recommended. If somebody has your company property, hopefully you have had a form where they sign off when they're issued that company property, and they're told on that form, if you fail to return it upon separation, we will deduct the following amounts from your paycheck. Once they sign that, then you have signed authorization under Texas payday law to be able to withhold the value of whatever that company property is. So you could give them their final paycheck and deduct the cost of whatever they failed to return, and then reimburse them once they return it.
Perfect. Thank you, Michelle, for that answer. If there's no other questions, we will send a follow-up email, like I said, with some of this additional information regarding questions that have come through, and we'll also send those follow-up interview questions that several people were interested in receiving. Okay, here's one more, Michelle. What if you don't have a valid address or updated for the termed employee? If you don't have a valid or updated address.
Okay, that is something we recommend you do annually, and then upon hire to get that information, but it is possible that you don't have it. I would use the contact information that you have and call or email the employee and say, I need to mail your final check. I believe the address I have on file is incorrect. You're going to want to document the attempts that you made. You're going to want to say, if I don't hear from you by the deadline, I'm going to go ahead and mail to the last address I have on file. Or you could say that you can come and pick up the hard copy check as long as your communication is with them. You're letting them know the final paycheck is ready. You just know that you have the wrong address. So I would do it as soon as possible, not wait till like the 6th day. But do it as soon as possible to say, I need to mail out your hard copy check, can you confirm your address? And then keep that in your, keep that in your file. It shows that you made a good faith effort to get their check to them within the time frame.
Any other last minute questions? Okay, thanks so much to everyone for participating, and I hope you'll have a great afternoon. Thanks so much, Michelle.